Recording in progress.
Hey, Mike.
Hare Krishna.
Hey, Krishna. I finally got this thing working, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I can share what happened was they asked me if I wanted to update the software for Zoom. Okay, here's Maitreya too. And Maitreya, there?
Haribo.
Haribo, Maitreya. Yeah, I was just telling Mike that the reason I was having trouble last time is because I tried to upload or update the software for Zoom, and I guess it takes a while for the computer, once you turn it on, to actually sync everything with the software. So that's why it was delayed. But now I've got it all fixed.
All right.
How you doing, Maitreya? How's the weather out there on the West Coast?
Wet and chilly.
Wet and chilly. Yeah, it's chilly here too on the East Coast. It's, oops, sorry about that. It's going to be like going down to 27 degrees tonight.
Oh,
The Midwest, I used to live in the Midwest, and it was pretty mild there. I used to live in Walla Walla, Washington. My father taught at the university there.
oh. That's just down
Where
the
are
road.
you in relation to that town?
Walla Walla is in the southeast corner of the state. I'm up in the northwest corner.
Oh, you're up near
Halfway-
the Vancouver then.
Yeah, halfway between Seattle and the border.
Oh, okay. It always rains there in the Midwest, though. I mean,
The Midwest, yeah, we're in the Pacific Northwest here.
right, the Pacific Northwest. Seattle was always pretty rainy. That's how they actually discourage tourists from coming and living in Oregon. They have, it just always rains here. Don't come.
Evergreen state. Of course, in the summertime, there's beautiful periods concerned we're having droughts. Cedars are dying off like crazy.
Yeah, I was there in the 80s. I remember in California, I was doing Sankirtan with Devada, remember him? And even in like 1988, it was really, really dry. I can't even imagine how dry it is now. We're going through Napa Valley and it was just like all brown. But, Kali Yuga is taking its toll. They're going to have to start chanting Hare Krishna, I think, in a mass scale in order to bring the rains. I'm going to share this screen now. We're starting out on text 31. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Mike, you want to start off with the Sanskrit?
Sure. Swadharmam api chapiksha navikampitamahasi Dhamayadi yudhachiryona Kshatriyana vidyayate Swadharmam. One's own religious principles. Api also. Cha indeed. Aveksha considering. Na never. Vikampitam to hesitate. Arhasi you deserve. Dharmyat for religious principles. He indeed. Yudhyat then fighting. Shreya, better engagement, anyat, any other, Kshatriyasa, of the Kshatriya, na, does not, vidyate, exist. Translation. Considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles, and so there is no need for hesitation.
Maitreya, go ahead.
Purport. Out of the 4 orders of social administration, the second order for the matter of good administration is called Kshatriya. Kshat means hurt. One who gives protection from harm is called Kshatriya, trayate, to give protection. The Kshatriyas are trained for killing in the forest. A Kshatriya would go into the forest and challenge a tiger face to face and fight with a tiger with his sword. When the tiger was killed, it would be offered the royal order of cremation. This system has been followed even up to the present day by the Kshatriya kings of Jaipur state. The Kshatriyas are specially trained for challenging and killing because religious violence is sometimes a necessary factor. Therefore, Kshatriyas are never meant for accepting directly the order of sannyas or renunciation. Nonviolence in politics may be a diplomacy, but it is never a factor or principle. In the religious law books, it is stated, Avesha mito nyanyam jigham shanta mahishita, yudamana parashakta, svargam yanti aparapumuka, yageshu pashavo brahman, hanyate satatam dvijay, samskritas kilamantraischa, tepi svargam avapnudan.
I guess I'll read the next paragraph here. In the battlefield, the king or Kshatriya, while fighting another king envious of him, is eligible for achieving the heavenly planets after death, and as the Brahmanas also attain the heavenly planets by sacrificing animals in the sacrificial fire, end quote. Therefore, killing on the battlefield on religious principles and killing animals in the sacrificial fire are not at all considered to be acts of violence because everyone is benefited by the religious principles involved. The animal sacrifice gets a human life immediately without undergoing the gradual evolutionary process from one form to another, and the Kshatriyas killed on the battlefield also attain the heavenly planets, as do the Brahmanas who attain them by offering sacrifice. There are 2 kinds of swadharmas, specific duties. As long as one is not liberated, one has to perform the duties of his particular body in accordance with the religious principles in order to achieve liberation. When one is liberated, one's swadharma, specific duty, becomes spiritual and is not in the material bodily concept. In the bodily conception of life, there are specific duties for the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, respectively, and such duties are unavoidable. Swadharma is ordained by the Lord, and this will be clarified in the 4th chapter. On the bodily plane, Swadharma is called Varnashram Dharma, or man's stepping stone for spiritual understanding. Human civilization begins from the stage of Varnashram Dharma, or specific duties in terms of the specific modes of nature of the body obtained. Discharging one's specific duty in any field of action in accordance with the orders of higher authority serves to elevate one to a higher status of life. I remember seeing those actual implements of the knives and stuff that the Kshatriyas use in Jaipur. They're like curved. Have you ever seen those?
No.
Anybody? Pretty interesting. They still do that. I would never do that. I'm not going to fight a tiger. Go ahead, Mike.
Yadurchaya chopapanam svargadharmam apavartam sukhina kshatriya partha labhante yudam idarsham. Yadurchaya, by its own accord, cha, also, upapanam, arrived at, svarga, of the heavenly planets, varam, door, Havartam, wide open, Sukhina, very happy, Kshatriya, the members of the royal order, Partha, O son of Prutha, Labhante, do achieve, Yudam, war, Idursham, like this, translation. O Partha, happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of the heavenly planets.
You can read the first paragraph as well.
Purport. As the supreme teacher of the world, Lord Krishna condemns the attitude of Arjuna, who says, I do not find any good in this fighting. It will cause perpetual habitation in hell. Such statements by Arjuna were due to ignorance only. He wanted to become non-violent in the discharge of his specific duty. For a Kshatriya to be on the battlefield and to become non-violent is the philosophy of fools. In the Parashara Smriti, or religious codes made by Parashara, the great sage and father of Vyasadeva, it is stated,
Go ahead.
Kshatriyo hi praja rakshan shastrapani pradan dayan nirjitya para sainyari sitim dharmena helaye. The Kshatriya.
Go ahead. The Kshatriya's duty is to protect the citizens from all kinds of difficulties, and for that reason, he has to apply violence in suitable cases for law and order. Therefore, he has to conquer the soldiers of inimical kings, and thus, with religious principles, he should rule over the world. End quote. Considering all aspects, Arjuna had no reason to refrain from fighting. If he should conquer his enemies, he would enjoy the kingdom, and if he should die in battle, he would be elevated to the heavenly planets, whose doors were wide open to him. Fighting would be for his benefit in either case.
Yeah, Parashara, that's Parashuram, right? Or is it? Yeah,
so.
What was his
No, there is a Parashara Muni and there's a Lord Parashuram, and I'm not actually sure they're the same person.
Oh, I don't know who they're referring to here, but Parshuram didn't like the Kshatriyas very much, at least when he was around. He killed them like 21 times.
Yeah, is he the father of Vyasadeva, or is this a different Parashara?
Parshuram, I think, was the father of Vyasadeva. I'm not actually sure. I don't want to say.
Well, here it does say Parashara, the great sage and father of Vyasadeva.
Okay, there you go. Good eye there, Mike.
And he wrote a scripture called the Parashara Smriti. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he actually killed them so many times they formed lakes of blood, and they actually became lakes after that. Why don't you read the Sanskrit, Maitreya? Text
This
30.
is text 33. Ata chetam imam dharmyam shangamam nakarishyasi tatvasa dharmam kirtim cha hitva papam avapshyasi. Ata, therefore, chet, if, tvam, you, imam, this, dharmyam, as a religious duty, sangramam, fighting, na, do not, karishyasi, perform, tataha, then, swadharman, your religious duty, kirtim, reputation, cha, also, hitva, losing, papam, sinful reaction, avapsyasi, will again. If, however, you do not perform your religious duty of fighting, then you will certainly incur sins for neglecting your duties and thus lose your reputation as a fighter.
Maitreya, you said that you used to memorize verses and recite them on Sankirtan.
I would memorize them on Sankirtan and recite them in class.
Oh, and recite them in class. You know Chedi Raj, right?
Yes.
He always used to recite, and every time he'd recite this particular verse, he would like act it out just to get your attention. He'd say, hit bum pop bum pops, he'd hit you in the arm. So let's see, let me just read the purport here. Arjuna was a famous fighter, and he attained fame by fighting many great demigods, even including Lord Shiva. After fighting and defeating Lord Shiva in the dress of a hunter, Arjuna pleased the Lord and received as a reward a weapon called Pashupatastra. Everyone knew that he was a great warrior. Even Dronacharya gave him benedictions and awarded him the special weapon by which he could even kill his teacher. He was credited with so many military certificates from many authorities, including his adopted father Indra, the heavenly king. But if he abandoned the battle, not only would he neglect his specific duty as a Kshatriya, but he would lose all his fame and good name, and thus prepare his royal road to hell. In other words, he would go to hell by not fighting, but by withdrawing from battle.
Interesting. Indra is mentioned as his adoptive father.
Adopted father.
Adoptive father.
why is he his adopted father? I mean,
He's his actual father.
is his actual father? I mean,
Yeah.
who
His
did
mother Kunti had got the benediction from who's the sage, the one who got in trouble with Maharaj Ambarish. Durvasa Muni gave her the benediction that she could call any demigod and have children. So she called Indra and had Arjuna. So Indra is actually
first
his father.
she called Karna?
Well, she
the
called
sun god.
various demigods, but in order to beget Arjuna, she called Indra. So he's actually the father. He's the real father. I mean, you could
Yeah, I
say
don't
the
know why they're
adoptive
saying
father
adopted
was
father.
Pandu, is actually more like the adoptive father, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be his adopted father, wouldn't it? I mean, as far as genealogy is concerned and family trees, I mean, the adopted father is not the real father. The real father is the seminal father.
yeah, which is Indra. So interestingly, the word adoptive here could also mean that when we talk about Arjuna, he's known as the son of Pandu. Therefore, he's one of the Pandavas. So as
Right.
far as the earth is concerned in genealogy and everything, he's a Pandava, and therefore Indra would become simply, the father by Leela. We know that he's the seminal father, but he's never mentioned except for in certain circumstances as his father. Interesting. Anyway.
Huh. Yeah.
There's whole books now written for kids. Well, there's probably some written for adults too, but they're in the fantasy genre of children who be begotten by demigods, half demigod and half earthling. And
Wow.
kids love reading these stories. And they're all, these are the real stories.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in New Vrindavan, all the kids would act out all these pastimes. They would go behind the ashram or the temple building there, with the lodge behind the lodge. I saw a bunch of kids. One had like a stick, it was as a sword, and then the other one had like a bow and arrow, and they were playing the Ramayan, and Lord Ram told the kid, Ram kid was telling Lakshman, he said, Lakshman, take Sita to the mountain cave. And they would just enact those pastimes all day long, such a way to become absorbed. I mean, that's the way that the gopis remembered Krishna when they were separated from him. So that's a really good way to remember Krishna, just act out those pastimes. And Prabhupada said, you should also do plays in order to preach Krishna consciousness, should do plays, but they should always be, the actors should always be devotees. And I remember just about last year, 2 years ago, no, actually probably more like 3 years ago. Time flies when you're not having fun, not associating with devotees. But Kripa Maya, you remember him, Maitreya, right? Very great soul, saintly person. He went to the West Virginia University there in the middle of the hills there, and he directed a play put on by the students. But and I told him, Prabhupada always said that you should always have these plays acted out by devotees, because he said it was very important. But his wife told him, the devotees will never agree to this. They won't stick to it, But the students are kind of like motivated, and they're in the class and everything. But anyway, it got them to chant the holy name and listen to these pastimes. So it was beneficial. But really, if the most powerful thing would be to have these pastimes enacted by devotees.
There was a devotee who just left this world a little while ago. His name was Rajendra Nandana Prabhu. And he was the temple president in San Diego for a while. And later he spent about a few months every year in Mayapur. Anyway, he came back, and they told him that he had stage 4 cancer just a few months ago, and he decided not to fight it and just to go. Anyway, well, I'm remembering him because in the 80s, late 80s or maybe early 90s, he was in a play in San Diego. They produced the book by Tamal Krishna. He wrote it as a play, about Lord Jagannath.
I've got those tapes.
It's just amazing. They did a play. It was the director was Lochan's daughter. Lochan is the devotee that does the Prabhupada Murtis in the temples, and his daughter, who passed away a few decades or so ago, Rasa Priya, she directed the play, and she took it so seriously. She made all the devotee actors commit that they would do it for a couple of months rehearsal, And then they finally did it as a dinner program in the temple. They actually sold tickets, and household
Wow.
devotees came in. And
That, I mean, that was a very impressive. My wife listened to that. I digitized those tapes. You know, you can digitize stuff.
you mean
And
the,
so
the play that they did in San Diego?
Yeah, yeah. They're
Oh,
not
they
actually
got
the-
so into it, they
tapes.
became the parts. And this devotee, Rajendra Nandana, played King Indradyumna. And
Yeah.
another devotee there, you might know him. I'll think of his name, Yudhisthira. Yudhisthira played another part. Pavamana played the part of the Brahmin in the play, and they all had rehearsed their parts for so many weeks and months that they just became the roles, and it was
Right.
amazingly impactful. It was.
Yeah, it was very. That was done in 1986, I think, on Lord
Ah.
Chaitanya's 500th appearance day.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Or like they presented that whole thing. That was a very, very powerful, dramatic, emotional presentation. That was awesome.
I'd love to find those tapes. I didn't know that they were.
I can send it to you. I can send you the MP3s. I send you a link and you can
Okay.
download them,
That'd
play
be
them on
awesome.
your phone.
Thank you.
I will do that. Maitreya, why don't you read the Sanskrit, and then Mike can read the purport of text 34.
Akirtim chapi bhutani kattayisyanti te vyayam sambhavistasya chakirtir maranat atirichyate. Akirtim, infamy. Cha, also. Api, over and above. Bhutani, all people. Kattayisyanti, will speak. Yea, te, of you. Avyayam, forever. Sambhavitstasya, for a respectable man. Cha, also. Akirti, ill fame. Maranat, then death. Atirichyate, becomes more. Translation. People will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death.
You know, I was thinking that, I'm a disciple of Kirtanananda, and I was always hoping, that his name would be cleared, because this kind of reminds me of his fate. Now he's persona non grata in ISKCON. All of his books were just rescued by Adipurusha in New York City. They have like 600 cases of his books, and they brought him from Florida, because there was this devotee who had him in a storage. I can't remember his name, but he died of COVID. And so there's still about 400, or like a bunch of cases of books that are as high as a man, that are just sitting down there, and will probably be destroyed because they couldn't fit them in this 20-foot box truck. So it's like nobody read these books. They're very valuable books. Some devotees are taking them. But if you know anybody out there, let me know, and I'll tell Adipurusha, and he can ship them out, for a small donation.
The Joy of No Sex?
Joy of No Sex, Christ and Krishna. Adi said that Joy of No Sex is actually very, very, somebody just started putting that on his table when he's serving out in Tompkins Square Park, and they just disappear. You'd think
we used to
that
distribute those in college dorms, and the guys would just start laughing that everyone wanted one.
Yeah. I mean, that it's just so unusual. You never see that. And Adi was talking about how these books are disappearing. Some bhakta would help with the prasadam distribution, just started putting them on the table, and now they're flying out the door. I can remember Bhima. He used to try to distribute that book at NASCAR races. And one guy, he took that book and just like flew it about, whipped it through the air and went to like 50 yards. He didn't like that message. But it is kind of interesting, because it is just completely the opposite of what the material world is. Everything, the material world revolves around sex, So I guess I'll read the purport here. Both as friend and philosopher to Arjuna and Lord Krishna now gives his final judgment regarding Arjuna's refusal to fight. The Lord says, quote, Arjuna, if you leave the battlefield before the battle even begins, people will call you a coward. And if you think that people will call you bad names, but that you will save your life by fleeing the battlefield, my advice is that you do better to die in the battle. For a respectable man like you, ill fame is worse than death. So you should not flee or fear of your life. Better to die in the battle. This will save you from the ill fame of misusing my friendship and from losing your prestige in society. Quote, that's a pretty powerful argument. So the final judgment of the Lord for Arjuna was to die in the battle and not withdraw. Mike, you want to read the Sanskrit?
Sure. Yadrana ruparatam amsyante tvam maharatha isham chatvam bahumato upayasyasi lagavam. Bayat, out of fear, Ranat, from the battlefield, uparatam, ceased, mamsyate, they will consider, tvam, you, maharatha, the great generals, yesham, for whom, cha, also, tvam, you, bahu mata, in great estimation, utva, having been, yasyasi, you will go, laghavam, decreased in value. Translation. The great generals who have highly esteemed your name and fame will think that you have left the battlefield out in fear only, and thus they will consider you insignificant.
Better read the purport too.
Purport. Lord Krishna continued to give his verdict to Arjuna. Do not think that the great generals like Duryodhana, Karna, and other contemporaries will think that you have left the battlefield out of compassion for your brothers and grandfather. They will think that you have left out of fear for your life, and thus their high estimation of your personality will go to hell.
Maitreya, you want to read the next one?
Avachyavadamscha bahun vadisyanti tavahita nindantas tavasam hyartyam tato dhuka taram nukim. Avachya, unkind. Vadan, fabricated words. Cha, also. Bahun, many. Vadisyanti, will say. Tava, your. Aditaha, your enemies. Nindata, while vilifying. Tava, your. Samartan, ability. Tata, that, then that. Dukataram, more painful. Nu, of course. Kim, what is there? Translation. Your enemies will describe you in many unkind words and scorn your ability. What could be more painful for you?
Go ahead and read the purport.
Lord Krishna was astonished in the beginning at Arjuna's uncalled for plea for compassion, and he described his compassion as befitting the non-Aryans. Now, in so many words, he has proved his statements against Arjuna's so-called compassion.
I like that, uncalled for plea for compassion. You know, Krishna didn't ask, nobody asked him for his plea for compassion. He just like made it up because of his bodily attachments. But, he was also kind of like, because Arjuna was on the bodily platform, someone who is on the bodily platform cares very much about their reputation, right? So he was saying, what could be more painful for you than to lose your status as a great warrior? I mean, he was known all over the place for like being the greatest archer in the world. And so, he appealed to him in that way too. And it just wasn't worth it. I mean, if you think about it, it would be better to die than if you valued your fame, your fame can last for a long time, but the material body only lasts for a little bit. I'll read the next one. Text 37. Hatova propyasyasi svargam jitva va bokshashe mahim to smud utista konteya udhaya krita nishchaya. Synonyms. Hata, being killed, va, either propsyasi, you again, svargam, the heavenly kingdom, jitva, by conquering, va, or bokshyase, you enjoy, mahim, the world. Tasmat, therefore, utista, get up, konteya, O son of Kunti, yudhyaya, to fight, krita, determined, nishchaya, of certainty. Translation. O son of Kunti, either you will be killed on the battlefield and attain the heavenly planets, or you will conquer and enjoy the earthly kingdom. Therefore, get up and fight with determination. Purport. Even though there was no certainty of victory on Arjuna's side, he still had to fight, for even being killed there, he could be elevated to heavenly planets. Mike, go ahead.
Sure. Sukha dukkhe same kritva abhalabhau jaya jaya. Kato yudhaya yujvasya Evam papam avapyasi. Sukha, happiness. Dukkha, and distress. Same, in equanimity. Krikva, doing so. Labha, alabhu, both profit and loss. Jaya, ajayu, both victory and defeat. Tata, thereafter. Yudhaya, for the sake of fighting. Yuj, vyasya, engage, fight. Na, never. Evam, in this way. Papam, sinful reaction. Avapyasi, you will gain. Translation. Do thou fight for the sake of fighting without considering happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, and by doing so, you shall never incur sin.
This is the first verse I ever learned on Sankirtan.
First verse you ever read?
Ever learned. This is the first verse I memorized.
Oh, that's a good verse for Sankirtan.
Yeah, I love it.
You know, it teaches you not to be attached. You know, I always thought when I was out in the pit, you know, I'd think, okay, I'm just going to do this for Krishna. I'm going to say exactly to each person what Krishna wants me to say and not be attached. And it relieves you from a whole host of anxieties. You know, I've got to say it this way or that way. If you just surrender to the pick, you know, and say everything like that, then it's a whole load off your shoulders. And that goes for every single thing that we do in the world, you know, not just, you know, working or serving Krishna, just everything we do. Forget about your own personal thing. I remember, do you know a devotee named Urmila Devidasi, Maitreya? You ever heard of her?
Yes.
She's like the heir to the Manischewitz fortune. She's a pretty advanced devotee. She gives classes on Manashiksha and all these other things and writes all the time. But she's a preacher, you know. But anyway, she said, I always think, you know, sometimes I catch myself thinking of what everybody else would think of me. And I mean, it's so silly to think that way. But, you know, just forget about happiness as stress, loss or gain, victory or defeat. And then be just attached to serenity to Krishna, and then you will transcend all of your anxiety and all of your considerations for gain and safety, and that's the way to think on the battlefield. You know,
her life is in devotional service was sort of a battlefield. You know, she was the teacher for the Gurukula and on the East Coast. Her husband wasn't a very nice person. I'm not going to go into any details because you're recording this and people will be able to access this without permission. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but she's suffered a lot in devotional service and shown herself to follow this verse pretty much: happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat, just doing her duty and tolerating what may come. So she
which devotee you're talking about, or you don't want to say?
I don't want to say. We'll talk about it offline.
Oh, okay. Yeah, things are hard, you know, when in devotee.
That was decades ago now, so it's sort of water under the bridge. I'm sure she wouldn't like.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing is, it's very difficult for family members when you have a disagreement with family members. What to speak of devotees? You know, just like Sita and Daksha, you know, she killed herself, and he didn't even blink an eye in that sacrifice. That's the nature of envy, which is so powerful. You know, it doesn't matter who you are. Daksha, you know, was a great progenitor, and he insulted her husband, and so she didn't want to be associated with his body anymore. So she took her own life. That's the nature of envy.
Question on this. So, like, I mean, obviously, I mean, the primary reason why Arjuna should fight is because Krishna wants him to. I mean, like, period.
Right, exactly.
That overrides and transcends any type of, like, you know, dharma or duty. But yet it seems like the last, like, 3 or 4 verses before this were focused solely on, like, the material platform. And again, maybe that's, you know, to appeal to all listeners, readers, hearers of the Gita. Mm-hmm. But that almost seems to contradict, like, what we're seeing here, you know, do this without considering happiness, distress, loss or gain, victory, defeat. But it was just like, you have to do this because of your reputation. You can't be looked at in this way. It seems like it's almost like dismissing everything that was just said in the last 4 or 5 proofs.
Well, I mean, Krishna does that throughout the Bhagavad-gītā. He says, okay, just forget everything that you just heard. Don't even
says that the last instruction is the most important one. So the very last instruction of the Bhagavad-gītā is abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender to me.
Yeah, that would be.
Whereas if you read the Gita, there's many places where he's prescribing different dharmas. But at the end, he just says, you know what? Forget about all that. He also tells Arjuna a couple of times, okay, have you heard this? Okay, then just do what you want to do. But that's not the end. He doesn't leave off there because he's so concerned with Arjuna and he's so devoted to his own devotee that he goes on after that, after really the Gita should have been over, but Krishna really, really is concerned and he really cares about Arjuna.
Yeah.
He loves his devotee. And so
that's a really important point because it's all about, Krishna's love for his devotees. It's a two-way street, and I was just reading about that in Chaitanya Charitamrita. In the Beta Kirtan pastimes where Haridas Thakur gets a little garden house near the temple. And, Lord Chaitanya was the master and Haridas Thakur was the servant. And there's so much love between them. He went and visited him every day in his little bhajan kutir there. But it's really important to get that realization of how much, Prabhupada says in that purport, he says that the Mayavadis think that the living entity and the Lord are equal, and they just conflate the relationship. But if the living entity is equal to the Lord, how is it that he falls down? How can the Lord fall down and be equal to the living entity? And so it's always a matter of the master and the servant. The master is always unlimited, and the servant is always a small portion of that, but the servant serves the master and the master serves the servant even more. So, this is, our Krishna wanted Arjuna to understand the Gita, like we were talking about the end of the Gita. And he said, have you understood this? Have you, because he was willing to relate the whole thing all over again at the end, if he didn't understand it.
You mentioned the pick earlier, or if we're just going out to try to distribute these books, you have to try to stop non-devotees or for all non-devotees, karmis engaged in mode of passion activities. You have to try to get them to stop and for a moment consider, some reason for buying a Bhagavad-gītā or Srimad Bhagavatam. It's not that much different. I mean, Arjuna's going on the battlefield against hugely talented, powerful warriors, and he's being asked to shoot his arrows at them. And it's going to take a miracle, just the way it takes a miracle every time you stop someone and get them to give a donation, or stop someone and get them to hear anything about Krishna consciousness, what to speak of actually taking a book and being favorable. It's a miracle every time. It's something, they're being inspired by the Lord in their heart. So this verse is very applicable to all these services. Do thou fight for the sake of fighting. We're going out there because Lord Chaitanya told us, be gurus and tell everyone you meet about Krishna. Right. So it's out of our hands. We have to do the service, and we can't consider our own happiness or distress or loss or gain. You have a quota, do so many books. So it feels like it's your loss or gain, but it isn't. All we can do is try. And then at the end, he says, by doing that, you never incur sin. This is the transcendental platform.
That's the idea of sacrifice. If you sacrifice for Vishnu, then all of your fruitive activities are completely burned up. That's the idea of sacrifice. If you surrender to Krishna, then all your karma disappears. And you don't have to worry about it. You just do your duty, and therefore you have no more obligation to anybody, not to your parents, not to your society, not to the sages, not to anyone. That's what happens when you surrender and you're nullified of all your sinful activities. I would think it's a pretty good deal, because all you have to do is just change your mentality a little bit. And then all that stuff is like, you automatically get all of that back, which is just such a relief. I don't know why anybody doesn't do that, but it's difficult. I mean, Lord Chaitanya, a lot of people didn't understand it, so he had to come and show people how to do it. But I think we're going to have to stop here because it's 6:39, so we're going to have to end this. And again, I thank you very much for your
Sorry,
participation.
Dr. Mike, I mentioned it was my favorite verse before we got a chance to read the purport, so we'll do that next time.
Yeah, well, we'll read the purport of verse 38
Right.
next time, and you can read it, Maitreya. That's a
Actually,
good,
Dr. Mike had just read the verse, so by rights, he should get the first paragraph, and then I'll get to
okay,
it.
and then you can read the Sanskrit of
Thank you for your association, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Stay dry out there in the
Thank you.
warm. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mike.